Major changes are coming to AEW television in January with a big signing from WWE overseeing these changes on All Elite Wrestling television. We have the ratings for this week's edition of Dynamite. Winter is coming on TBS, and it's good news for the declining All Elite Wrestling ratings. Chris Jericho recently main evented the ROH Final Battle pay-per-view, but TBS sources reportedly were against him appearing at the event. Sting has missed in-ring action due to an undisclosed surgery. Miro has commented on his AEW absence as he waits to return to television. We have an update on Trent Seven's status with AEW. Jon Moxley nearly loses an ear on AEW Rampage, and we have the Final Battle pay-per-view buys for Ring of Honor. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling, and let's start off talking about big changes coming to AEW next year, specifically big television changes to both Dynamite and Rampage, and it might all be driven by Warner Bros. Discovery, but also by a new hire, a big scalp for All Elite Wrestling. Now, All Elite Wrestling has made some waves through the industry earlier this week when they hired WWE's former Vice President of Global Television Production, Mike Mansury. We're going to have way more in-detailed reporting on that in just a second, but it's been stated that Mansury was actually being groomed as the eventual replacement for Kevin Dunn in WWE. Of course, Dunn being the company's executive producer and chief of global television distribution. However, Mansury departed WWE because Dunn seem firmly planted in his position for the foreseeable future. Mansury is now serving as the senior vice president and co-executive producer of AEW, and it sounds as though some major changes will be on the way coinciding with this hiring for All Elite Wrestling. According to the Wrestling Observer's Dave Meltzer, Warner Bros. Discovery and AEW President Tony Khan have agreed that a change to the look of the company's shows is due, with that supposed change coming sometime next month. The exact nature and the extent of these changes is currently unknown, so it could be something as simple as new graphics, new music, to more broad alterations such as a new stage setup or an increase in production value. Mansury's hiring seems to line up with this plan, and it sounds as though he'll have a few weeks to settle in before implementing the changes to the brand. Meltzer's report also states that people in WWE were quite high on Mansury, but that Dunn, quote, covertly made his life difficult when he began rising up the ranks too quickly. After starting with WWE in 2009, Mansury had earned a vice president title by 2016. In 2020, Mansury left professional wrestling to join the Pat McAfee show, where he stayed on until moving on in May of last year. He spent a little over a year with One Championship, a combat sports company based out of Singapore, before signing with AEW. Now, as I mentioned, it's being widely reported that Warner Bros. Discovery and Tony Khan have decided to change the look of AEW programming. These changes should go into effect at some point in January, and it was part of the reason to make this hire. Again, what this will look like, we really don't know. I think it's going to be more than just graphics. They can change graphics whenever they want. And if you look back to the first episode of AEW Dynamite to now, the graphics have changed. They have been altered slightly, etc. But I think this is going to be a much grander and wider scale change. I think obviously we're going to see graphic changes, but I think we'll see changes in music. I think we'll probably see a change to the stage as well as the overall way that they shoot the television show to make it stand out, make it pop more. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Mike Mansury. As I mentioned, this was first actually reported by Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select, who reported that AEW made a big hire in the form of Mike Mansury. Mansury announced his return to wrestling as a senior vice president and co-executive producer for AEW. As I mentioned, he previously served as the vice president of global television production for WWE. He's been around AEW shows for the last several weeks at least, but this hire is even bigger than many really truly realize on the surface. Now, when it comes to the WWE side of things, when the Triple H regime took over, many asked and speculated if Kevin Dunn would also be on his way out. When Fightful asked within WWE, they were repeatedly told that the one person who did seem poised to replace him had actually left the company, and they didn't think they would be able to get him back until earlier this week, that person went nameless until the Mansory hire was eventually revealed, and WWE sources indicated to Sean Ross Sapp that it indeed was Mansory who could have been that person to replace Kevin Dunn. They were told that in WWE there wasn't much further he could go above where he had been unless Kevin Dunn stepped aside, which did not obviously end up happening. Another source indicated that he was a name that they thought Triple H would try to bring back to the company, and Triple H seemed very keen on his work. But they've stated they didn't think Mansory would come back unless he would be taking over for Kevin Dunn in that role, and Dunn still hasn't budged from his spot. Now, Fightful have also reported that they've already heard from talent and staff within both AEW and WWE who are happy about the hiring and believe it will go a long way in helping AEW's content. One WWE source said that he's a good hire specifically because he's more in touch with AEW's current demographic and can significantly increase the level of production that the company has. One WWE source that heavily criticizes AEW to Fightful, which I think is an interesting sentence to say the least, said that he saw this as AEW's biggest hire of the year, which I think goes to show just the level of reputation that Mansory has. And I want to know from you guys, if you could change anything or these changes to AEW's production, what should they look like? Is it more than just cosmetic? I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, there probably will be cosmetic changes akin to the stage looking different, the graphics looking different, the music looking different. But what else from a production point of view do you want to see changed? Do you want to see... I want to see the format of the show change. I think the format of the shows become too predictable, and that is partially production, I think, as well. I think that they use the backstage 30-second vignette of, we're here for an interview, someone interrupts, okay, we're going to have that match next week on Dynamite or this Friday on Rampage. They use it so much and so often. It's such a crutch, and they can have more creative ways of doing that. I think that a fun way to do it was, and this is one of the rare things that I think Impact Wrestling got right in sort of the late 2000s, was that there was a period of time where, you know, backstage was almost shot sort of documentary style, and you'd have segments happen inside of you know, buildings or rooms, and the camera would be on the outside, but they'd be mic'd up, or the way that it was shot differently. Instead of it being a one camera setup, there'd be a two camera setup. You'd have coverage on either side, and it was shot more like a television show as opposed to a pro wrestling show. I still think the format of pro wrestling is still very antiquated. Like the WWE show today doesn't really look production-wise all that different to the WWE show in the mid-2000s or even the Attitude Era. In terms of what they do, how they shoot that show, there might be a few more cameras at ringside to get more angles, but there really isn't that much change. And I think there's so much innovation that we have seen over the last few years just in terms of production on other shows and other sports that they could do that. I mean, we raved about it when the WWE borrowed the Fox cameras, the 8K cameras when they were making their entrances. That's great. Or even the WWE, you know, the graphics that are like the 3D graphics or the VR graphics. I mean, they're different. At least they're different. Now, I'm not saying AEW should copy that and do that, but certainly with Tony Khan having his links to other forms of entertainment and the NFL, there are so many different ways of producing things and changing things from a production standpoint that they could do that could make the show feel different. They could have the entrance ramp be in a different spot of the arena, or they could have the hard camera be on a different place. You know, just what I would want. And it's not like, you know, it's not like you tune into AEW and it feels like WWE light, because it doesn't. But I think there's more they could do to differentiate themselves and just feel completely different. So that's my hope of the changes in production. But let me know your thoughts. What should AEW change? What should they keep the same? What should they do? What should they bring back that maybe they used to do that they don't, that could improve them from a production point of view? Now, speaking of Warner Bros. Discovery, they'll be pretty happy with the ratings this week for AEW Dynamite Winter is Coming. Didn't hit that 1 million mark, but certainly a noticeable improvement in terms of the rating and viewership for Dynamite on TBS. After several weeks in a row of sliding Nielsen ratings, both in terms of the key adults 18 to 49 demographic and overall viewership, AEW Dynamite rebounded big with the December 14 episode, which was branded as the third annual Winter is Coming episode. Thanks presumably to a strong main event in MJF's first ever AEW World Championship defense against Ricky Starks, as well as the first 2 editions of Winter is Coming being positioned well above the usually branded episodes of Dynamite. The show averaged 950,000 viewers overall in the P2 plus demographic and approximately 428,000 in the key adults 18 to 49 demographic, according to Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. The latter figure was good enough for a 0.33 rating in the 18 to 49 demo. It's the highest for the show since October 5th. Wednesday night's viewership was the highest overall viewership since the show 3 weeks later on October 26th. Compared to last week's show, there was an increase of 13% across both metrics, and according to Show Buzz Daily, Winter is Coming came 3rd place among cable originals for the day in the key demographic. Now, compared to the median of the last 4 weeks, the numbers for Wednesday's Dynamite were up in every single demographic. The biggest jump, most interestingly, actually came in women aged 18 to 34, with 51,000 viewers, which is an increase of a whopping 31% over the 4-week median. Men 18 to 49 were next best, with a 19% increase to 300,000 viewers, while women aged 18 to 14, which was up 14% to 128, adults 18 to 34 was up 15% to 169,000, men aged 18 to 34 was up 15% to 117,000, men 35 to 49 was up 14% to 183,000. Women 35 to 49 was up 13% to 76,000, and all viewers outside 18 to 49 were up 14% to 522,000. All saw increases in the same range. The only rating for adults 35 to 49 was up 8% to 259,000, was outside of that range in the growth of the median. Meanwhile, the audience's median age was just over 50 years old, which is identical to the 4-week median as well. Just goes to show that wrestling audience on average is still very, very old. Among cable originals for Wednesday, the pair of NBA games on ESPN beat Dynamite, with Winter is Coming outranking the NBA shoulder programming, which certainly they'll be very happy with as well. So I saw some people criticizing this, going, no, they didn't break 1 million viewers, but actually they don't. They really don't usually. I mean, it was the best viewed AEW Dynamite Winter is Coming in terms of the key demographic ever. There's been 3 of them, and it was the highest key demo rating that they've ever had for this special themed episode. It wasn't the highest in terms of viewership. 2020 had more viewers, which was that Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley AEW World Championship main event. But in terms of year upon year, it's up less than a percentage, but it's about even. And given the recent ratings, I think they'll be happy. Traditionally, around this time of the year, Dynamite and AEW doesn't do as well in terms of the ratings. They don't tend to get that 1 million mark at this point of the year. That usually comes into next year as they build into Revolution and then Double or Nothing and All Out. That's the time they peak in terms of the year. And around September time as they get to the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite and Rampage. But they'll be very happy with that. They'll be happy with that. They'll be happy with the increases across the board. They'll be happy with the key demographic increasing. Again, you can say, they didn't crack 1 million, but they never do. And I think given recent scrutiny about the ratings, they'll be happy with that, and they'll hope as they head into the holiday bash next week and then New Year's Smash and then on the road to that big show in LA on January 11th. That'll be the big point which they hope to do a big number then. Whether they do or not, we'll have to wait and see. Chris Jericho, of course, lost the Ring of Honor World Championship at Final Battle last weekend. And since the beginning of AEW, Chris Jericho has arguably been the company's top act. And apparently TBS is also very well aware of his value to the company. According to a new report in this week's Wrestling Observer, Tony Khan had always planned that Jericho versus Claudio Castagnoli would close out Ring of Honor Final Battle on December 10. But the AEW owner did receive a little pushback. Dave Meltzer is reporting that Senior Vice President Sam Linsky and the TBS brass were initially against Jericho being on a non-AEW pay-per-view. There was one point where Jericho was actually slated to lose in his 4-way match at Full Gear to Castagnoli, but they ultimately changed it when everyone got on the same page. The stakes were high for Castagnoli at Final Battle because not only was the Ring of Honor World Championship on the line, but so was his future in the Blackpool Combat Club. Of course, if Castagnoli had lost, he would have to join the Jericho Appreciation Society. But that did not happen. Castagnoli won, Jericho submitted to the Giant Swing, and Jericho's Time as Ring of Honor World Champion and seemingly his storyline with ROH is done. Did it really elevate the brand? I don't think so. In terms of pay-per-view buys, we'll talk about that later on. But I can understand why TBS were reluctant, because they thought, well, this guy's doing great stuff for us and for AEW. And it also goes to show they never really had any interest in really getting involved when it came to Ring of Honor. And that's why Ring of Honor, their TV show is going to be on Honor Club. Sting's been absent recently, and we now know why. It's because he underwent surgery. Sting was last seen on AEW Dark in a no DQ match with Darby Allin against Jay Lethal and Jeff Jarrett on November 19. Before that, he was in a no disqualification match with Darby Allin against the House of Black. Excuse me, it was Full Gear, not Dark. Against the House of Black on the September 21 episode of AEW Rampage. Dave Meltzer has explained why Sting hasn't been wrestling recently in AEW. In the current Wrestling Observer newsletter, Meltzer explains, quote, "The reason Sting hasn't been in the ring of late is because he had arthroscopic surgery on one of his knees about 7 weeks ago. It's a form of keyhole surgery. Sting himself has recently confirmed this, saying he had to get his knee scoped out, his old knees. The fact that Sting is in his 60s and wrestling is still absolutely wild to me. So take as much time off as you need. You're still doing absolutely insane stuff." Another person that's been absent is Miro, and despite being under an AEW contract, Miro has only found himself wrestling 4, you can count them on one hand, 4 matches this year, with all coming between June and early September. Prior to his loss to Bryan Danielson last year at Full Gear, Miro had been positioned highly in the company and rarely took losses on AEW TV or pay-per-views. This has led fans to wonder why he has all but disappeared from AEW this year. While talking to Muse TV Network, Miro discussed why he has not wrestled for AEW recently and what he's been doing in his preparation. He said, quote, "It's not up to me. I'm doing everything I can, and from then on, I'm just sitting and waiting for the opportunity." Miro's most recent match came at All Out in 2022 this year, which saw him team with Darby Allin and Sting to take on the common enemy of the House of Black. Miro's side walked away with a victory, leaving his 2022 record at 3-1, his only loss coming at Forbidden Door in a 4-way match to determine the inaugural All-Atlantic champion. So by all accounts, he's waiting. Now, it was reported that creative had been pitched to him. He wasn't happy with that creative, so they're waiting for something else. But it seems wild to me that someone like Miro sits on the sidelines and you can't find anything for him to do. If this was WWE, we'd be in an outroar. We'd criticize them massively. And you've got to keep the same energy. How you can't find something for Miro to do, I just think is absolutely incredible. Trent Seven has recently been making appearances in AEW, and there's been a few more mustaches hanging around AEW recently, mainly because of Trent Seven appearing on AEW programming in the last few weeks. He made his debut for the promotion last week on AEW Rampage, coming up short in challenging Orange Cassidy for the All-Atlantic Championship. He was then spotted in the crowd at Ring of Honor's Final Battle a day later, and he was back last night once again on AEW Rampage. Naturally, this has led to speculation that Seven may have come to some sort of deal or signed some sort of deal with AEW. As it turns out, he hasn't, and he's not put pen to paper. Per the latest Wrestling Observer newsletter, Seven and AEW have come to terms on a per-show deal. As such, he's not signed a full-time deal with AEW at this time, and the number of dates Seven and AEW has agreed upon is currently unknown. So it's not as if he's with a full-time deal, it's a per-show deal, but as is the case with AEW, that could blossom into something else in the future. Of course, if we get any more information about that, we'll talk about that here on the channel. Speaking of Rampage last night, there was a bloody match between Jon Moxley and Sammy Guevara. I mean, it's Jon Moxley. There's always going to be a bloody match. But we heard coming into the show via Moxley's wife, Renee Paquette, and by spoilers, that Sammy Guevara and Jon Moxley were going to have a bloody battle. While the match was hard-hitting throughout, it will likely be most remembered for several gruesome spots, including but not limited to Sammy Guevara seemingly ripping Jon Moxley's ear nearly off his body via an earring tug that Tony Schiavone on commentary likened to a similar scene of Cactus Jack in the early 90s in Germany. Also, copious amounts of playing in Moxley's blood was done by Guevara and his lovely bride Tay Mello, who got involved in the action by slapping Moxley's bloody face and showing the camera her covered hand. Shortly thereafter, Guevara exited the ring, and apparently Moxley's blood all over his mouth and teeth from biting him. He then kissed Mello. The shocking sights ended with Moxley getting the pinfall victory over Guevara. After the match, Hangman Adam Page ran out to confront Mox as promised, and with many security guards attempting to stop them, initiated a buckshot lariat. But instead of wiping out Mox, he took out a security guard. So of course that Moxley and Hangman Page feud is going to continue. It's not the first time they've done the the earring spot. Jericho did it earlier this year at Quake by the Lake. But it would be a Moxley match without blood. What it's going to do, if anything, to the Rampage ratings, I don't really think all that much, to be honest with you. But we're clearly building towards a Moxley and Hangman Page feud. Probably a match you would probably think either at the LA show or at AEW Revolution in March. Finally, we touched on Ring of Honor Final Battle earlier. We have an update on how many pay-per-view buys the show did. Early estimates of ROH Final Battle's pay-per-view buys have now been revealed. ROH Final Battle took place last weekend, headlined by Chris Jericho versus Claudio Castagnoli. For the Ring of Honor World Championship, the other most noteworthy title matches were FTR versus the Briscoes, of course, in that double dog collar match. Samoa Joe versus Juice Robinson for the TV title, and Athena versus Mercedes Martinez for the Ring of Honor Women's World Championship. According to Dave Meltzer, in the latest edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, the show drew at least 25,000 pay-per-view buys, saying, quote, "The show looks to have done more than 25,000 pay-per-view buys, 19,000 streaming, and 6,400 on cable, based on first week estimates." Meltzer would then go on to add that because these are early estimates, the final number is likely to be much bigger than that. The number also confirmed it was the biggest pay-per-view number and highest attended ROH Final Battle in company history. The show reportedly had 2,700 in attendance. It's more than Death Before Dishonor in April, more than Supercard of Honor in April, and less than Death Before Dishonor in July, so it's half in between there. Again, I know people look at that and go, oh, it's terrible, but at the same time, it's the most viewed and most attended Final Battle in company history. So whilst it's an improvement, it's not AEW numbers or anything like that, but I think it goes to show where this brand is and where this promotion is, and that's why, ultimately, it's on Honor Club. Because, you know, it's significantly smaller than AEW. They're doing the best stuff they've ever done in Ring of Honor history, but there's still a way to go to make that company super successful. But there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe bottom right-hand corner. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.